So first, we're just going to come into and or find a place in our body that we feel a little bit more grounded or connected to. This is going to be home base. So within any kind of somatic awareness practice, I highly recommend having a home base that we get used to. And this might be something we develop over time. Might not be like we know what that is right now. So just experiment if you're new to this. But just to give some recommendations, usually the feet, the hands, the weight of our body in the seat, these can be good starting places for this kind of neutral home base. And neutral just means where we can feel, but usually more intense or overwhelming feelings aren't necessarily arising in those spaces. So they can be a home base that we can come back to when we feel unsafe or we feel like we're going too far in the practice or we've gone too far. One thing I'll point out with any kind of somatic awareness, in this case, meeting or learning to meet our feeling world, is we're actually not trying to get anything specific. So it's no problem if you need to take like a little mini break from the main practice and come back to your home base in the body, or just open the eyes completely and come out of the practice. That's also fine. I think it's really quite beautiful when we take away the pressure that there needs to be a certain conclusion or result to our practice. It's just like we're more entering a process. We're putting in a certain amount of time and then we're working with the process of that rather than an expectation of a certain conclusion. Just experiment for a moment with a home base for you. And what that means is you bring some attention to your feet or your hands, or maybe the weight of your body in the seat. Now, if this is a little bit vague, or maybe it's hard to feel a lot in these areas, that's okay. Just feel what you can. For me, just using the feet as an example, I'm just really being with the sensation of the bottoms of my feet connecting to the ground below me. So there's this kind of literal sense of felt connection. It's okay if that's really simple. It's okay if that's really, just external. And try your best to allow your attention, awareness, just a sense of the present moment to settle there. So we're using it as a kind of anchor, but we're also using it as a way into our feeling world. So if this is your hands, it's similar. You're just feeling the connection point of your hands and your legs. Or if it's the weight of the body in the seat, you're putting more attention to that connection point. And attention here is very light. It's not like a very heavy single-pointed concentration. It's also able to be aware of a wider field or a wider scope of the body or environment. So we'll start to do that a little bit. Just scoping out from our home base. So you have your home base. Hopefully you chose one. And it doesn't mean that can change later, but just stick with one for this particular practice. You start to scope out. You start to widen the field of what you're paying attention to in the gross body, meaning just the sense of the temperature on your skin, other connection points within the body. So maybe we can widen out into a field of the connection point of the feet to the ground, hands to the legs, and weight of the body to the seat. See if you can simultaneously be with the space or be with the feelings that are arising within each of those points. So it's literally like a scope that gets wider. Sometimes I like to feel this as a circle that's expanding. Or if you'd like to imagine it as light, it's like more light is being shined on these different areas. It's like the scope of light starts to get wider. And that light is mind. It's mind being aware and paying attention to. And of course, if the breath is a normal part of your practice and you like working with the breath, you can breathe into these areas. So on the inhalation, you breathe into the feet. On the exhalation, just allow your attention to deepen, to widen within the feet, legs, etc. So from these points that we're practicing widening out into, see if you can widen your scope to include your whole body. If this is a stretch, you can also just start with half of the body, so maybe the lower half. But eventually we widen our scope to experience the body as if it's being seen within a sphere. So there's a sphere around us, in front, above, below, to the sides, in all directions. But our attention, our awareness, is really with our felt perception, scoping out into the body from the head all the way down to the toes, and seeing if we can allow ourselves to feel it simultaneously, feeling all the parts of the body simultaneously, and or just what we can feel, just being satisfied with that. There's a sense of pervasive felt awareness. I also want to introduce a somatic tool, somatic awareness tool I often apply, which is also the space in between. So this helps if we're having trouble feeling a more pervasive quality of felt awareness. And here, just imagine the space between each of the feet, the space between the legs, the space between the hands, meaning like feel both feet at the same time, and then become aware of the space that's in between the feet at the same time. Or feel both hands at the same time, and then become aware of the space between both hands. Just try it with one. And now starting to notice all the other kinds of spaces throughout the body, where it's not about feeling necessarily specifically, it's about entering the space of the body, which includes gross physical sensation, but also you may be noticing other kinds of feelings. Just to be clear, we can categorize feeling into three categories. One is our gross sensation, we've already been talking about and working with, and the other is emotions, which are a combination of thoughts, impressions, other kinds of memories, and subtler sensations. They're not gross, meaning they're not on skin level or nerve ending level, but they're in the body. Where else would they be arising? They're arising in the body, and they're felt. They're a feeling we can connect to. And this includes both pleasant and unpleasant, neutral as well. And the third category is even subtler sensations we can link to energetic movement in the body. So these can be various and also subtle enough that sometimes we can't even put words to what these are. It could just be the feeling of movement in the body that's internal, and or the feeling of what's almost an emotion, but not quite an emotion, but has a quality to it. So with any of these three types of aspects of the feeling world, we can start attuning to these. Tuning means being open to their presence. You don't have to go necessarily contrive them or think them up or try to like evoke them or bring them out. Just be with what's there. If gross sensations are the most relatable right now, that's what you can relate to, just relate with that. But as emotions arise and or subtler energies arise, we also can choose to relate with that with a sense of openness and curiosity, a sense of both felt presence where we're feeling the various feelings as they're arising, and we're also aware of that, this quality of mind that's also watchful of that experience. So relate here means watchful, feeling, and letting be. And neither the watchfulness or feeling the feeling takes us into the extremes of dissociation and coldness towards our feeling world, and or just becoming and indulging in the feeling. This isn't a practice of just indulging either. So these two binaries show up in this practice, where one binary is when we get co-opted by the feeling and we identify really strongly with it unconsciously and we just become it. The other binary is being so aware, so present, but at the same time having an intention to get rid of it, that we actually distance ourselves in meditation. And this is not what this practice is about. What does it look like to neither have distance nor acceptance? Or we could say, what does it look like here to neither accept or reject the experience? I'm laughing because it sounds very paradoxical. But remember, the feeling world doesn't speak English. so maybe we can even invite curiosity towards this paradox. And in essence, it's quite simple. We just learn to let be, which means not rejecting, suppressing, distancing, or pushing away. But also, we're aware and watchful, so we don't have to indulge or completely become the experience, the felt experience that's happening. Actually, it doesn't need that from you in order for it to feel compassion from you. Say that again. Your emotion doesn't need you to become it in order for it to feel heard and felt and seen. It just needs you to be with it. And of course, there's a level of acceptance here. We're dropping our judgment about it, dropping the need to figure it out, the need to fix it. We're just meeting it with the kindness of non-judgment, feeling the feeling with awareness. So just like any meditation practice, we're going to become distracted by our thinking mind. Expecting anything else is probably fooling ourselves. So just like any other meditation practice, we just recognize when that's happening and we orient back towards the feeling world. Maybe starting with your home base again, opening up to fuller experience of the feeling world and just lending an ear. lending an ear doesn't mean a sound needs to arise. It just means it's available. What does it look like to lend an ear on the level of feeling and awareness? You're available for a feeling to express itself or be felt, but it's also okay to just sit with the gross sensation in the body, being open to that. I found this practice to be more of a practice of developing openness, that we're available. We're developing also this sense of just being available as a compassionate friend. No need to fix, change, remedy. Of course, we're the ones feeling it, so it can be challenging, especially when difficult things are arising. That's when we need a lot of courage and curiosity. The curiosity here is in the form of meeting the feeling world and waiting. So it's a really unique type of curiosity. Dropping into the body, feeling the feeling, and waiting and being. So an approach I often recommend and I practice taking myself in relation to any meditation practice is this attitude of there's nothing to get, but there is something to get used to. So when we're sitting with, letting be with the feeling world, being with it essentially, without getting co-opted into these binaries, meaning when the binaries come up, we notice them and we reorient to a sense of open curiosity. There's really nothing to get. There's just this process to get used to, this process of being with, process of awareness, and a process of being open to another way to understand, which is actually not trying to understand through the thinking mind. Just being with the feeling, we'll understand at some point because feelings move, they shift, and there's a type of knowing that happens through awareness. Not the knowing of the thinking mind, but a deeper knowing. And this deeper knowing is also quite healing because things also start to open up. Constrictions that have been dormant and stuck for years can open. And open doesn't mean they go away necessarily. They can. But open just means there's an openness to them, that they're finally allowed to exist. And yet, because of awareness, we don't have to be forced to be them. And that's because we're practicing being with them. So there's a difference here. Being something versus being with something. And things can shift and open over time. So especially when there's a very strong constriction that arises in our feeling world, we need to really work with these tools. Not trying to suppress or reject it, also not trying to become it, so we're preserving awareness, but feeling it. And that also means emotion can be felt, evoked, expressed. It's not wrong to express emotion in this practice. It's just what's happening internally. That's more what's going on. So that's a line we all have to figure out experientially. It's not something I can tell you. What that line is between not becoming and not rejecting. Because sometimes we might think, oh, I shouldn't feel this, or I shouldn't, express emotion, or I shouldn't cry in this practice because that would be becoming. No, that's not necessarily becoming. It's very individual. how we work with this. Really, a lot of it is just sitting with the feeling world as best you can, coming back to home base when you need, coming back from distraction and back into the feeling world as we notice, just like any mindfulness practice. Just give this another minute. And so, wherever you're at in the practice, as we start to come out of it formally, just bringing your attention back to home base. Coming back to the feet, connected to the ground, or back to the hands, connected to your legs or knees, or back to the weight of the body in the seat. And more specifically, the connection point, like where the two connect. The practice doesn't really change. We just let be with that. And I also like to transition, especially if we've been closing our eyes, actually just opening the eyes before we close the practice. It's going to be challenging if we're not used to meditating with our eyes open, but just as you open your eyes, just let the gaze rest in space. We're not staring at anything in particular. And we're still connected to our home base. So there's kind of now all this other information that gets flooded in as you open your eyes, sense of the room. Maybe that triggers thoughts. See if you can keep the majority of your presence in the home base of your body, feet, hands, weight of the body. This is a way to integrate the practice. It's also a way to start to see room for this practice to come into your informal practice throughout your day. And we'll develop that a bit further by just looking around the room a little bit and just starting to move the body. But there's still this sense of embodied awareness, somatic awareness, and also whatever wants to arise within the space of that. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for your practice.